sure that the tab room is ready for us to get started. And I will give you the all clear. So we should get started momentarily. All right, judges, I have released the student competitors into the room and I have asked them to turn on their videos. The purpose of this is to do a conflict check to make sure that your children, boyfriend, girlfriend, grandchildren are not competing in this room. Please take a look on your screens now as our competitors file in and see if you recognize them. If you do, please send me a message immediately and we will get that conflict resolved. If I don't hear from you, then I will assume that we have no conflicts.
Eric, a quick question. Are we waiting on you to come back to do the all clear, or once we avoid conflicts, are we good to start?
I'll still give you the all clear, and that should happen in a couple of minutes, I think.
Perfect.
Okay, looks like we have no conflicts, so I'm going to ask the student competitors to once again turn off their video unless they are the attorneys for either side handling pretrial.
All right, good morning, everyone. Looks like we have the all clear from our bailiff. So let's call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. My name is Judge James Pennington. I'll be presiding this morning, this morning for most of everyone. It looks like I can see from participants that all our scoring judges have video and audio muted. Judges also remind you to go ahead and make sure that you hide all non-video participants like we did in the judges meeting. So you should only be seeing me and the advocates. With that, do we have any pre-trial matters to attend to? Or actually, first, let me get introductions from both sides. And I'll start with the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Deeksha Walia, and I, along with my co-counsel, Mr. Jaleel Baker, we're representing the plaintiff, Ms. Stevie Rogers, in today's proceedings.
Morning, counsel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now I'll get introductions for defense counsel, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Julie Musto, and along with my co-counsel, Andrew Dubsky, will be representing the defense in today's case, which is Drew Mars.
Thank you, counsel. Now, are there any pretrial matters to attend to? And I'll start with plaintiff's counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. First off, according to Rule 615, we would like to invoke the Rule 615 for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring the party representative. The plaintiff's party representative is Ms. Stevie Rogers.
Defense counsel, what say you to the 615 motion?
I agree with opposing counsel, and we would just like to make note that our party representative who will not be sequestered is.
Okay, counsel, I will grant the 615 motion. All witnesses will be obviously constructively sequestered. Are there any other pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. As this is our first time in your courtroom, we would like to ask your preferences regarding certain pretrial matters, such as the unique format of this trial. With all due respect to the court and Your Honor, would it be okay if we stayed seated for objections so we don't have to adjust our camera every time?
Absolutely. And in fact, you can do statements, directs, and crosses from a seated position in Midlands jurisdiction as well. Regarding objections, I don't want speaking objections. What I want is if there's an objection, state the objection and the grounds. Whoever is directing or crossing the witness, cease immediately, and then we'll take it up. We will do constructive sidebars so you don't have to ask to approach, and we will assume that all objections are heard outside the presence of the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. And Your Honor, I would just like to state that exhibits 1 through 7 have been pre-admitted according to the pretrial order. And would you like us to ask permission before putting them up on the screen, or is it okay if we just screen share them when we're using them during our directs and crosses as well as speeches?
As a procedural matter, and just to make sure that the court's record is clear, I would ask that you seek permission or leave from the court before publishing anything so our clerks can keep track of everything.
Yes, Your Honor.
But I have taken note of the pretrial order that all 7 exhibits have been pre-admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. And exhibits 8 through 18 have to be admitted during trial. And we would just like to double check that you have access to the bench book that contains today's complaint and answer, the Judge Parker's pretrial order, stipulations between both parties, case law deemed relevant, and the Midlands Rules of Evidence.
I certainly have all that information. Judge Parker's clerk was very diligent about getting me those, so I have those.
Yes, Your Honor. And just lastly, I would like to direct your attention to the Slayer statute, which is the first page of the available case law. And that Slayer statute states that in Midlands, we have to prove the plaintiff that the defendant purposefully or knowingly caused the death of Agatha Lee, hence shall not receive any part of the decedent's estate, even though the defendant, Drew Mars, was considered the sole beneficiary of Miss Agatha Lee's entire estate.
I'm taking note of that statute and obviously refer to it in statements as need be and as you need to inform the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. And at this time, the plaintiff is ready for opening statements.
Thank you, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Musto, any pretrial matters for the defense?
Just one. I realize that you are the presiding judge. However, in addition to Your Honor, would you like us to also refer to the non-video participants and judges as the jury?
This is a jury trial, so you would refer to all our scoring jurors as your jury panel. This is not a bench trial, so you don't have to direct statements toward me.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is ready for opening statements.
Okay. It is my understanding that you all will be keeping time, so I'll let you deem that as necessary. Opening statement for the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. Jaleel Baker on behalf of the plaintiff. Permission to proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, may it please the court. Today, you're going to hear about a beloved author in the Midlands community, an 8-year-old woman named Agatha Lee. You're going to learn that she unfortunately didn't lose her life due to natural causes, but instead lost her life to a pill. You're going to learn that Agatha didn't make this mistake by herself, that she had a caretaker who was the defendant in today's trial. You're going to learn that the defendant was responsible for switching her pills at her bedside and causing her death. Ladies and gentlemen, we will present you all the evidence that is against the defendant, and we will show you exactly how and why the defendant committed this crime. And that it boils down to one thing: money. Agatha Lee's will and estate were at risk, and the defendant, he had to act fast or lose everything. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this is Agatha Lee. Agatha Lee isn't your normal 80-year-old grandmother. Agatha Lee was a famous world-renowned author and was very well known in her community. But you're going to learn that Agatha Lee actually led a very private lifestyle because she had lost most of her family to some very devastating accidents. But she had one living family member, her pride and joy, her granddaughter, Miss Stevie Rogers. I would like you all to meet Miss Rogers. And Miss Rogers and her grandmother undoubtedly had a very close and personal relationship. You'll learn that in 2008, that Agatha Lee actually left her entire estate, which was over $20 million, to Miss Stevie Rogers. But you're going to learn that in 2018, things took an unexpected turn in the defendant's favor. You're going to learn that the defendant, who lived alone with Miss Agatha Lee, was able to convince her to give her the will. You're going to learn that the defendant really needed this money. And that when Stevie Rogers came back to spend some time with her grandmother, and they ended up having a conversation about this will, well, you'll learn that everything changed. You'll learn about how all in one day on August 14th, the defendant planned and executed the murder of Agatha Lee, and that it all started from that one conversation. You'll learn that Agatha Lee and Miss Stevie Grace were having a private conversation behind closed doors, and that they decided that Agatha would be contacting her attorney to remove the defendant entirely from her will. You're going to learn that at the end of the conversation, Miss Stevie Rogers walks out of the room and she bumps into the defendant, who was listening into their conversation the entire time. It was at that moment that the defendant clenched her fist, she clamped her teeth, and she looked Stevie Rogers in the eye and said, "No way." Ladies and gentlemen, at this moment, the defendant decided he had to act fast or lose everything. You'll learn that later that day, on August 14th, the defendant actually went to the pharmacy to get an over-the-counter drug called chloroangerine that he knew that Agatha was deathly allergic to. And you'll learn that later that night, the defendant was seen going into Agatha's bedroom when she normally takes her pills. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll learn that the defendant was seen entering Agatha's bedroom at 9:35 p.m. on August 14th, and the next morning she was dead. Ladies and gentlemen, we will prove to you that the defendant committed the murder of Agatha Lee. We will prove to you that the defendant, who is entitled to and has all the estate of Agatha Lee, killed her for the money. Because the defendants had to act fast or lose everything. And ladies and gentlemen, that's why we brought suit against the defendant today. Because in Midlands, according to the Slayer statute, a person who purposely causes the death of another cannot receive any part of that person's will. This simply means that it is our burden today to prove to you that the defendant intentionally killed Agatha Lee. Now, ladies and gentlemen, because this is not a criminal trial, we actually have a lower burden of proof. We have to prove to you by a preponderance of evidence that the defendant is liable. And this simply means, what do you believe is more likely? The defense will be able to come up here and twist the facts. But at the end of the trial, after hearing all of the evidence, after hearing everything that is against the defendant, it is up to you to decide, what do you believe is more likely? Do you believe that the defendant committed the murder of Agatha Lee? And if you believe that that is the most likely conclusion, then you must find the defendant liable. Now, we will meet this burden. We will prove to you that the defendant committed the murder of Agatha Lee. We will do this by calling two witnesses to the stand. First, Miss Stevie Rogers will come to the stand, and she will explain to you how close her relationship was with her grandma. And she'll also explain to you some of the interesting things that she experienced with the defendant. She'll tell you about how the defendant was listening into their conversation that day. She'll tell you how the defendant made some threatening and intimidating remarks to her. And she'll tell you that she saw the defendant enter her grandmother's room the night before she died. Ladies and gentlemen, she'll tell you that she's never once touched Agatha Lee's pill dispenser, and that Drew Mars, her caretaker, the defendant, always did. You'll learn that the next person we'll bring to the stand was a private investigator named Mr. M.J. Bond. And he will tell you that after conducting an independent investigation, that he came to the conclusion that the most likely answer that happened to Agatha Lee was that the defendant killed her. Mr. Bond will be able to tell you this because the defendant left some evidence behind. You'll learn that Mr. Bond will be able to tell you about a black duffel bag that was filled with chlorandramine pills in the defendant's closet, that this bag had a fingerprint on it from the defendant, and that there were 2 pills switched out of Agatha Lee's pill dispenser that had the defendant's fingerprints on them as well. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Deeksha Walia, will come before you, and she will explain all the evidence. She will explain everything that is out against the defendant and how he needed that money. And he had to act fast or lose everything. And that is why we will ask at the end of this trial that you find the only conclusion that is supported by the evidence. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Does defense counsel have the opening they wish to give?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Your Honor, oh, sorry. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, may it report.
Counsel.
My opposing counsel just came up to you and discussed and gave you a story about money, how they want to convince you that our defendant was caring for Agatha Lee only because of the money. But I am here to tell you a different story, one that has Stevie Rogers after the $20 million estate, not our defendant. Because the fact is, Stevie Rogers was family in name only, but Drew Mars was so much more. On August 14th of 2018, Agatha Lee unfortunately passed from an allergic reaction from a heartburn medication called chlorandramine. Any amount of the drug in her system would kill her. And you will hear that at the time of death, there were 500 milligrams in her bloodstream. The first person to find her in the morning was her caretaker, Drew Mars. When he realized that she had no pulse, he sank to the ground in disbelief. You will hear that for over a decade, Mr. Mars was beside Miss Lee every day, caring for her and keeping her company when she had no one else to turn to. While her only living relative and grandchild, Stevie Rogers, was touring the world, Mr. Mars was beside her. Mr. Mars was there for her for over a decade of birthdays, holidays, and supporting her on every anniversary of her child's death. In 2018, Miss Lee changed the benefactor of her estate from her grandchild by blood to the person who cared for her the most in her final days. That is why Miss Lee left everything to Mr. Mars. Now, the plaintiff, Ms. Rogers, is trying to convince you, members of the jury, that they are entitled to an estate of a grandmother that they left behind. In order to convince you of this, the plaintiff must have a preponderance of evidence that Mr. Drew triggered the Slayer statute. As they had said earlier, the law states that a person who purposefully or knowingly causes the death of another may not receive any part of the descendant's estate. This means that the plaintiff must show you that it is more likely than not that Drew Mars, her doting and loving caretaker, played a part in her death in that he either planned to kill her or took action knowing it would cause her death. However, they will be unable to show this. We will present evidence to you that Mr. Mars had absolutely no involvement in the death of Agatha Lee. To prove this, we will call forward 2 witnesses. The first witness we will call is Drew Mars himself. He will speak of his experience with Miss Lee and how they developed a grandmother-grandson relationship over the course of many years. He will speak of his duties to her, how he cared for her, and how she was like a grandmother to him, how he grieved when discovering her on her deathbed. He will tell you how Miss Rogers reacted angrily after they were denied Miss Lee's inheritance. They will testify that Miss Rogers had unlimited access to the Lee home, including the room where the very medication that killed her was stored. Next, the defense will call Ryan Cabrera, the biographer of Miss Lee. She will testify to the close relationship that Mr. Mars and Lee had. That when Miss Rogers appeared at Lee Manor after nearly a decade of no contact, he felt protective of what she may do. And she will describe her conversations with Miss Lee about Miss Rogers. How Miss Lee expressed that she felt neglected and abandoned by Rogers, that she decided to change her will to exclude her from it. That at the end of the day, Miss Rogers was family, but Mr. Drew Mars meant so much more. At the end of the trial today, you will be able to see the whole story. You will have heard the story of a caretaker that was more like a grandson than Miss Lee's actual grandfather. How he grieved her death and the end of their close relationship. How Miss Stevie Rogers was family in name only, but Mr. Drew truly cared for Miss Agatha Lee. At the conclusion of trial today, my co-counsel, Andrew Dubsky, will come before you and show you that based on the evidence that we have presented, there will be no proof that the will should be overturned. Could not find Mr. Drew Mars liable. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. Now that we've proceeded with opening statements, does defense counsel have any witnesses they wish to call?
Your Honor, Jaleel Baker on behalf of the plaintiff. Is it all right if the plaintiff proceeds with our first witness, Miss Stevie Rogers?
That is fine. And counsel, Mr. Baker, since you used Exhibit 1 in your opening, I'm going to go ahead and sua sponte admit that into evidence unless there's an objection from defense counsel.
No, Your Honor, there shouldn't be any problems. This is one of the pre-admitted documents today.
Since the jury's already seen it, just as a procedural thing, I'm going to go ahead and admit that document.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we'd like to call Miss Stevie Rogers to the stand.
You may proceed when you're ready.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Miss Rogers, you're muted.
Sorry, not used to Zoom. Sorry, my name is Stevie Rogers.
Thank you, Miss Rogers. Can you start by telling us where you're from?
Well, I actually grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, but now I travel a lot and I kind of bounce around from place to place. Usually warmer places, but I'm not picky.
Well, what do you do for a living?
Well, I pick up a lot of odd jobs wherever I go since I'm always traveling. Sometimes I'll pick up some music gigs, I write novels. I get the writing thing from my grandma.
Well, Miss Rogers, can you tell us why you're here today?
My grandma died back in 2018, and I think that her caretaker, Drew Mars, had something to do with it. I just want to make sure that she gets justice in whatever way that is.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about your relationship with your grandmother. Can you start by telling us who exactly was she?
My grandmother was Agatha Lee. You might know her. She was one of the most famous mystery novelists of all time and one of the smartest people that I have ever met.
Well, how was your relationship with your grandmother?
We were really close for most of my life. I used to spend every summer at her house in Alabama growing up. Every day she'd make me a pitcher of sweet tea and we'd sit on the porch reading mysteries together. I still think about that all the time.
Well, were you two always this close?
We tried to stay close, but things changed. When I was in college, my parents were both killed in an accident with a drunk driver. After that, it was hard to see my grandma without thinking about them. So I stopped reaching out as much.
Well, did your grandmother ever reach out to you, Miss Rogers?
Yes, at the start of 2018, she reached out to me because she was making some changes to her will.
Would you recognize that will if you saw it in court today?
I would.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to publish Exhibit 9 onto the screen. Now, does this look like the will that your grandmother had written?
It looks like it, yes.
It hasn't been changed or altered in any way?
Not that I can see.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to enter Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Is there any objection from defense counsel as this is not one of the initially pre-admitted documents?
Yes, Your Honor, on the objection of hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
You may.
As you can see, that this document is a will and is created. It was created in accordance with a record of regularly conducted business. This is a document that is also stipulated in the pretrial orders that it is a valid will for Miss Agatha Lee. So, Your Honor, this is a exception to hearsay under Rule 8036.
Ms. Musto, what is your response to counsel's proffer that this is a business record?
Well, simply for the fact that while it is a validated will, and the defense is not arguing whether it's valid or not, it is certainly not a record of regularly conducted business. This is a will. Miss Agatha Lee was a novelist and was making her money through royalties. Nor has this been confirmed by the custodian. It was a regularly conducted business record, but as it is a will and not a matter of business, it would not fall under regularly conducted business exception, which I believe my opposing counsel is trying to enter it under.
Your Honor, if I may.
Mr. Baker, give me just a second. Let me look at that stipulation.
Your Honor, if you go to the pretrial orders.
Okay, I see it.
Let's see. Under, I believe, evidentiary rulings, the number line is 18. It says Exhibit 8 is a valid will executed by Agatha Lee on August 10th, and Exhibit 9 is a valid will executed by Agatha Lee on February 1st. And Your Honor, furthermore, I was just proffering that these statements are in fact fair and accurate and true. We also are using this to show Miss Stevie Rogers' subsequent action and that she responded and went back to go spend time with her grandmother. So we can not use this statement or this document for the hearsay purposes and just use it for the subsequent action of Miss Rogers.
Ms. Musto, with that concession, do you still have an objection with the admission of Exhibit 9 with the limited instruction that this is not for truth, but for subsequent action?
I will agree with that, Your Honor.
All right, so I will admit Exhibit 9 subject to limited instruction. Members of the jury, you're not to take this for its truth value, but for the subsequent actions of Miss Lee. So it will be admitted conditionally. Counsel, you may proceed.
Now, Ms. Rogers, you mentioned that something may have changed about this will. Did anything change in 2018?
Yes, My grandmother took me out of her will and put her caretaker Drew Mars in it instead.
Well, did she ever give you some sort of explanation as to why she did this?
Yes, she sent me a letter where she talked about how distant we'd been for the past few years and how our relationship just didn't feel the same anymore. It was really a wake-up call for me.
Well, can you tell us why it was a wake-up call for you?
I had a lot of regret about the way that I'd handled things after my parents died. You know, it was easier at the time to keep distance from my grandma, but reading that letter really put things into perspective for me. It had been almost 10 years since my parents died. And you know, we were family. So I decided it was time to see my grandma again.
Well, did you ever go get to see your grandmother?
I went to her house in Alabama that summer to go visit her. That was the last address I had for her. But when I got there, she'd already moved out of the house by then.
Were you able to find your grandmother?
Yes, my grandma lived pretty off the grid. She didn't even have a cell phone. But I knew I needed to see her, so I hired a private investigator to help me find out where she was. Finally, I found her at her new house in Midlands.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about what it was like when you guys reconnected. How did your grandmother react when she saw you?
The question calls for speculation.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Counsel, you may.
Your Honor, we were simply asking for observations and for Ms. Rogers to elicit what she saw Agatha Lee do in response to her coming to her, and knocking and showing up at her door. So, Your Honor, this is not asking about the mindset or the feelings or emotions of Agatha Lee, rather her explicit actions and the observations from Ms. Rogers.
Ms. Musso, I don't think we've got to the point of speculation just yet, but I will caution the witness to only testify to your observations. I don't want you getting into the mindset and trying to speculate as to what your grandmother may have been thinking at a certain point in time. Ms. Musto, if you feel like it goes further than this ruling, renew your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Ms. Rogers, when you got back to meet up with your grandmother, how did she react?
Well, I had to explain to her why I had stopped reaching out. But once we finally talked, it was like everything went back to normal. It felt like I was finally able to come to terms with what had happened to my parents. Like I was 15 again, drinking sweet tea on the porch with my grandma and talking about mystery novels.
So, was it okay when you got back?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that was different was that my grandmother had her caretaker living with her now, Drew Mars.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about your experiences with the defendant. How did you come to experience the defendant?
Drew definitely made his presence known. She would ask me every day when I was planning on leaving. He was very attached to my grandma. He'd constantly interrupt my conversations with her, and a few times I even tried to make my grandma breakfast, and he wouldn't let me bring it to her. He had to bring it to her. I don't know, the whole thing was really weird. It seemed like I was in the way of something.
Did the defendant ever do anything else that was concerning to you?
Yes. One day, my grandma and I actually had a conversation about her will, and Drew was just acting really weird afterwards.
Well, can you tell us what day it was that you were having this conversation?
August 14th. It was the day before my grandma died.
Well, Ms. Rogers, please tell us a little bit more about what was happening during this conversation.
My grandma and I were in her study, and we started talking about our relationship. It was really nice. That was when she told me that she was planning on putting me back in her will.
On the grounds of hearsay?
Response,
Your Honor, the statements were that Agatha Lee was planning on putting Miss Stevie Rogers back into her will. Your Honor, these are pursuant to the rule 8033, a then existing mental state. these fall under that exception, as it was Agatha's plan to put her daughter back in the will. This is an 8033 exception, Your Honor.
Ms. Musto, what is your response regarding Mr. Baker's proffer that this testimony is an exception under Rule 8033?
I would respond with the fact that while it is true that they were talking about the prospect of putting Stevie back into the will, it is still an out-of-court statement used for the truth of the matter asserted, which that should not be allowed in the court today.
Based off the proffer that this is a then existing mental state in mind or a plan, I'm going to allow the testimony. Ms. Musto, you can certainly cross-examine on the veracity of this statement or this conversation.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Ms. Rogers, can you continue telling us what exactly this conversation was about?
Yes, my grandmother told me that she was going to put me back in her will and take Drew out of it entirely. She said she was going to call her lawyer about it in the morning.
Well, you mentioned that the defendant was involved in this conversation. What was the defendant doing?
Well, at first, he wasn't involved in the conversation. But when the conversation was over, my grandma and I left the room. And as soon as we opened the door, Drew was standing right there glaring at me.
Did the defendant do anything else in that moment?
He was clenching his fists. His face was red. He looked really angry. He started to leave for lunch with my grandma, and as they were walking away, he turned around to look at me and mouthed the words, "No way."
Well, Ms. Rogers, I want to talk to you about some other things that you saw the defendant doing on August 14th. Did you see the defendant again that day?
Yes, I saw him again at around 9:30 that night.
And what did you see the defendant doing at 9:30 at night?
I saw him go into my grandma's room, which was weird because I knew that my grandma wasn't in her room. I just left her in the study.
Objection, Your Honor, just speculation.
Explain those grounds, Ms. Musto.
At this point, there has been no knowledge or explanation of knowledge of how Stevie Rogers at this point knew that her grandmother was not in her bedroom at the time.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
You may.
Ms. Stevie Rogers just explained that she had just left a conversation with her grandmother in her grandmother's study, which is outside and separate from her room, that when she just left her grandmother, she saw the defendant enter into her grandmother's room. Your Honor, this was simply within her rationally based perception, and she is making a claim that she saw someone go into her grandmother's room when she thought her grandmother wasn't there based on her rationally based perception, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
You may.
Excuse me, Miss Stevie Rogers, while she may have had a brief conversation with her a while before seeing Drew Mars exit their bedroom, we still have no indication that Drew Mars knew that the grandmother was not in her own bedroom. And simply because that they had left a conversation sometime before seeing Drew Mars that night, that does not automatically guarantee that the grandmother at the time was in the bedroom. The grandmother, as it was a very large house, could have still been in the study, could have still, and could very well be in the bedroom.
Ms. Musto, I'm inclined to agree with you. Mr. Baker, I'm just going to ask that you lay some further foundation to just create a temporal nexus between the events. Because like Ms. Musto said, we heard testimony, study, bedroom. Give us some foundation as to the time frame, just so it's clear for the members of the jury. So I'm going
yes, Your Honor.
I want to sustain the objection subject to the foundation. Ms. Musto, if that foundation is not laid, renew your objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Rogers, why don't you just tell us what you saw the defendant do?
I saw Drew go into my grandma's room, and he was holding something.
Well, was it strange for the defendant to be going into your grandmother's room?
Yeah, it was.
Objection, Your Honor, to mischaracterization of evidence.
Your
As
Honor, if I
the,
can respond.
Hold on just a second, counsel. Ms. Musto, explain your grounds on that there was a mischaracterization.
the plaintiff at the moment is trying to categorize the action of the defendant as strange by going into Miss Lee's room. However, we have previously laid foundation that Mr. Drew was the caretaker of Miss Lee, that they helped in any need that Miss Lee had. So it would be logical that at bedtime, if Miss Lee needed help, that it would be logical that it would it would not be strange that Mr. Drew would be entering into her room as the caretaker of Miss Lee.
Ms. Musto, I'm going to make a ruling that goes more to the weight, not the admissibility of the evidence. You can certainly make that assertion in your proof or in your cross-examination of Ms. Rogers. So I'm going to overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor. And now, Ms. Rogers, was it strange for the defendant to be going into your grandmother's room?
Yes. I knew that Drew was in charge of handling my grandma's medicine, but I'd only ever seen him do that on Saturdays. And this was a Tuesday.
Well, Ms. Rogers, do you know when your grandmother died?
She died later that night.
Do you know how she died, Ms. Rogers?
Yes, I saw the autopsy.
Would you recognize it if you saw it in court?
Yes, that's it up on the screen.
Your Honor, permission to publish the autopsy to the members of the jury?
As this was one of the pre-admitted documents, Ms. Musto, do you have any objection to it now being published to the members of the jury?
No objections, Your Honor.
Mr. Baker, you may publish it to the jury.
And now, Ms. Rogers, what does this autopsy say about how your grandmother passed?
It says that my grandma died from taking chlorandramine pills.
Well, do you know what that drug is, chlorandramine?
Yes, it's a medicine that my grandma was deathly allergic to.
And how did you know that your grandma was allergic to this medicine?
Drew Mars told me.
And thank you, Ms. Rogers. Your Honor, at this time, we have nothing further.
Cross-examination, Ms. Musto?
Yes, Your Honor. One moment, please, if that's all right.
Certainly, take your time and you may proceed whenever you are ready.
Good afternoon, Ms. Rogers. I'll be now asking a series of yes or no questions, and I'll be asking that you answer them to the best of your ability, if that's all right.
Okay.
Now, Ms. Rogers, you loved your Nana, didn't you?
Yeah, I loved her. She was the only family that I had left.
And sadly, you and your grandmother spent a great deal of time apart, didn't you?
Yeah, like I was saying before, I couldn't really be with her without thinking about what had happened to my parents. So I didn't really reach out to her for a while.
In fact, that long while was without going and seeing her face to face for almost 8 years, correct?
Yes, I called her a few times, but it was just too hard to look at her.
I'm sorry, a few times?
I called her for her birthday, her 80th birthday.
Ah, that's right. And do you know what year was that?
I don't remember exactly, maybe 2017.
That's correct. Now, despite this distance, she still tried to reach out to you, didn't she?
Yes, she did. And she sent me that letter, which is when I realized that I needed to see her again.
But despite her calling you multiple times and sending you multiple letters, you never wrote her a single letter, didn't you?
No, and I regret that now, but I mean, I told you.
Regardless of
I
whether
didn't
you
look at
regret
her.
that fact or not, it is true that you never wrote her a single letter, nor called her more than once in the 8 years you were apart.
Yes, but when I finally did see her again and I explained,
Thank you, that's all that's needed. Now, because of this, and because of the lack of content, you didn't know where she lived, correct?
no, I went to her house in Alabama because that was the last place that I knew that she lived.
And when you went back to Alabama, you found that that house was demolished, didn't you?
Yeah, I found that she had moved out of it.
So, in that one conversation that you had with your grandmother over 8 years, you never questioned where your elderly grandmother was living?
No, I just assumed that she was still living at the Alabama house. I never really thought that she would sell it or destroy it.
Now, you had to hire and bond to find her, didn't you?
Yes, I couldn't find her on my own, so I hired him to help me.
And were you or were you not employed at the time of contacting M Bond?
And like I said, I had some odd jobs. I don't remember if I had a job when I contacted him, but I had some money.
That's right, you only had $12,000 time, correct?
Yeah, from the jobs that I had been doing.
Yet you paid $10,000 out of that $12,000 to find your Nana that you couldn't reach out to her yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, it was important to me that I went to go see her. I'm telling you, it was one of the biggest regrets of my life.
Now, were you planning on surviving off of that $2,000?
Well, honestly, I was planning on selling my car. I just knew that I needed to find her and I was willing to pay whatever it took to get to her.
That's right, you own a BMW. I almost forgot. Even with the sale of that car, you're still with no solid gainful means of employment, correct?
Well, like I said, I pick up odd jobs whenever I travel. So I kind of live off of that.
That's
But I
right.
have some assets too.
Do you not have, that's correct, odd jobs. However, you don't have a steady job at the moment, do you?
No, not a steady job, but that's kind of the way I like it because I travel so much.
Fair enough. Now, I'd like to direct your attention to August 14th, 2018. Now, you had been drinking that night, correct?
I had a couple glasses.
You had 3 glasses of brandy that night.
Objection,
didn't you?
Your Honor, to unfairly prejudicial.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
You may, counsel. Actually, Mr. Baker, to meet the prong of 403, the testimony has substantially outweigh any undue prejudice. So how is this testimony substantially outweighed?
Your Honor, the opposing counsel has been bringing up some sort of drinking that Miss Rogers did on that night, and hasn't connected it at all to how this pushes forward anything that's going on in their case or makes any fact more or less likely in today's case. So, Your Honor, there is no probative value for her asking this line of questioning about what Miss Rogers had to drink that night. It's prejudicial, Your Honor.
Okay. Now,
Your Honor, may I respond?
yes, Ms. Musto.
I'm simply bringing up the fact that Miss Rogers was drinking that night, not to necessarily highlight the fact that she had been drinking, but several facts where that alcohol in itself, no matter how much, can impair judgment. And also that they had told their grandmother and several people within that house that night that they had stopped drinking and had come from rehab, creating a flaw in the witness's truth value.
Ms. Musto, am I correct to assume that this drinking was occurring on August 14th?
Yes, Your Honor.
With that, I'm going to allow the testimony as it would go to impeach what Ms. Rogers has testified previously, which I did tell you to bring up on cross-examination. So I'm going to overrule the objection at this point. Mr. Baker, if this goes on or gets outside of that little span where we're talking about on August 14th, certainly renew your objection, but I'm going to give you that leeway.
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, I'm sorry, I don't remember getting a response from you, Ms. Rogers. You had 3 glasses of brandy that night, correct?
It was either 2 or maybe 3.
Was it 2 or 3, Ms. Rogers?
I think it was 2. It could have been 3. I don't know. It was 2 years ago.
Ms. Rogers, you wrote a disposition today, correct?
Yes.
And do you remember what you said in that disposition that you prepared for today?
Yes.
And with permission from the court, I would like to present the deposition for Ms. Rogers.
Your Honor, we'd like to object to hearsay at this time.
I'm going to overrule the objection at this point. I do believe Ms. Musto is attempting to impeach Ms. Rogers, so I'm going to allow her for this impeachment. If you feel the impeachment was not valid, then you may renew your objection to hearsay, and we can take that matter up at that point.
Yes, Your Honor.
At this time, Your Honor, I would like to screen share the deposition of Ms. Rogers.
Granted.
Now, Ms. Rogers, are you able to clearly see the screen share that I've put up of your deposition?
Yes.
Now, I would like to turn your attention to line 230 and read silently as I read aloud. How much brandy did you have while you were downstairs? And your answer was a couple glasses, maybe 3. So is it fair to say that you had at least 2 and more likely 3 glasses that night of August 14th?
Hang on just a second, Ms. Musto.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Mr. Becker, you got hearsay objection?
Yes, Your Honor. We believe that this is not a prior inconsistent statement. If you could recall Ms. Rogers' statement saying that she did not clearly remember, but that she definitely had 2 or 3 drinks, Your Honor. At this time, opposing counsel has asked numerous questions about whether or not it was 2 or 3 drinks, and this is not a clear prior inconsistent statement. And it also, Your Honor, isn't really relevant how many drinks she had compared to 2 or 3.
Counsel, I'm going to overrule your objection. I think it is relevant for the jury to hear exactly how many drinks Ms. Rogers had. I do recall, without having our court reporter show us a transcript, I do recall her saying maybe 2, maybe 3. But with that waffling on the number, I think it's important for the jury to understand exactly what the witness previously testified to drinking. So I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, at this time, may I please deconstruct the demonstrative and take down the case? Or rather, take down the deposition?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So it has now been established that you were drinking. Now, you are aware that alcohol is a substance that can impair a person's judgment, regardless of how much has been consumed, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, to improper opinion.
Response, Ms. Musto? Response?
My response is that we're not trying to claim that Ms. Rogers is any way an expert in it. As somebody who has drank and as somebody who is clearly familiar with drinking, they would simply know that alcohol would impair a person's judgment. We're not trying to bring up any facts about how much they would, it's their rationally based perception, whether it would cause impairment.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yeah, no need, Mr. Baker. I'm going to sustain your objection. Ms. Musto, getting into the effects of alcohol does extend well beyond a lay witness's opinion. I think the jury has the picture that there was some drinking involved on August 14th. So I'm not going to let this testimony go down this road. So I'm going to sustain the objection. I don't think there was much of an answer, counsel. So insofar as there was a response, I will strike that and the offending question as well.
Yes, Your Honor. And at this point, Ms. Rogers, I would like to bring you a little bit earlier in that day. You were at Lee Manor for the entirety of the day, correct?
Yes.
And after you had talked to Miss Lee, both her and Drew Mars left to go to a biography meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they were gone for a while, weren't they?
Yeah, they were gone for a little while.
And I would be correct in saying that there aren't any locks inside the house, would I?
I think that there's a lock on Miss Lee's door, but other than that, I'm not sure.
But even if that door is locked, couldn't a person enter in through an adjacent bathroom leading to her study?
I'm not positive.
Well, Your Honor, if I may pull up the Exhibit 5, which has already been entered into evidence, just for a demonstrative sake and to show the groundwork of Lee Manor, to show that there is a study adjacent to Miss Lee's bedroom.
Mr. Baker, is there any objection to the publishing of Exhibit, was it 5, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Musto, you may publish.
So, according to this accurate description of Lee Manor, even if there was a lock on Miss Agatha Lee's bedroom, a person could simply come around through Agatha's study and enter into Agatha's bedroom through the bathroom. Is that correct?
I mean, I guess it would depend on if there was a lock on her bathroom door going into her bedroom.
Do you know if there was a lock on her bathroom door?
I'm not sure.
And now taking down what has been previously marked as Exhibit 5. So, in addition to that, there isn't a lock on Drew Mars' bedroom door, correct?
I'm not sure.
So, assuming Mr. Mars wasn't in his room, anybody could go into his room, is that correct?
I have no idea.
I'm sorry, Ms. Rogers, based on the diagram I had showed you, and assuming that there isn't a lock on the door, is it possible that somebody could enter into the room?
I guess there wasn't a lock on the door, but I have no idea if there was. I never tried.
Well, assuming even if there wasn't a lock on the door, you could possibly have gone in there while Mr. Mars had left the building. Is that correct?
I've never been in Drew's room.
Yet there wasn't anyone at the house while Miss Lee and him were out to corroborate that. Is that true?
No.
I'm sorry, that's not true?
No, there wasn't anyone at the house.
All right. And in fact, you were completely alone inside Lee Manor on August 14th. Is that correct?
For a little bit of the time, yes, but not the whole day.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. Mr. Baker, is there any redirect for this witness?
Your Honor, at this time, we have no redirect. We'd just like to ask that Ms. Rogers is excused.
Ms. Rogers, insofar as I do believe you were deemed a party representative, so you may retake your seat at our virtual council table.
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the plaintiff have any other witnesses they wish to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Mr. M. Bond to the stand.
Ms. Wall, you may proceed when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to members of the jury.
Bond. MJ Bond's the name.
Mr. Bond, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm not as famous as my movie counterpart, but I'm a private investigator, which means I locate missing persons, help people find out information, and I help sometimes with criminal investigations. And I do think I dress a little better than my movie counterpart.
Now, Mr. Bond, how does a private investigator find their cases to work on?
Well, honestly, the work finds me. People come to me when they're looking for something or situations that need to be handled, and I do my business from there. We have a little saying down at the firm. If you want something to find out, all you got to do is come find me.
How many cases have you worked on?
Dozens. I've worked on cases all across the world. Some of them you've definitely read about.
And Mr. Bond, how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I was involved in today's case because Miss Rogers hired me 2 times. Both of those times were issues involving her grandmother, Agatha Lee.
When you work on cases, what is your goal in those cases?
When I work on any case, the only thing I can guarantee my clients is I can make my best conclusion from the evidence I collect. And that's what I do.
So I'd like to talk to you about the cases that Ms. Rogers hired you for. Why did she hire you the first time?
Well, Ms. Rogers hired me June 5th, 2018, to help find her missing grandmother, which I did. We located her in Midlands.
And why did Ms. Rogers hire you the second time?
Unfortunately, Ms. Rogers hired me the second time to investigate the death of her grandmother.
And when was that?
August 15th, 2018.
So where did you go when you arrived? Where did you go to investigate the death of Ms. Agatha Lee?
So on August 15, 2018, I received a phone call from Ms. Rogers letting me know the situation, and I headed straight over to Lee Manor as fast as I could.
Objection, Your Honor, on the grounds of hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may be heard?
Just a second.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Is it Dubsky?
Dubsky, Your Honor.
Mr. Dubsky, could you explain your grounds on the hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor. The witness just explained that Miss Stevie Rogers had called them and informed them to come down to Midlands, and that is a statement of hearsay, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may?
Hey, Ms. Wally.
Your Honor, the statement that Mr. Bond elicited was that he was headed to Lee Manor and he would be there right away. It was not an out-of-court statement that he was offering. He was offering his statement saying that he was going to head over to Lee Manor. And according to what opposing counsel said about the Stevie Rogers calling him, that's already been elicited in the testimony of Stevie Rogers. Therefore, it's not an out-of-court statement. Therefore, it's not hearsay.
Well, Ms. Wally, Mr. Bond was constructively sequestered pursuant to Rule 615, so we can't use the fact that Ms. Rogers had already testified. Ms. Dubsky, I do believe that your objection was a bit untimely, as we were already getting into the subsequent actions. Furthermore, I would rule that this was more of a subsequent action. He got the phone call. This was his subsequent action. So I'm going to overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond, can you repeat what happened where you were headed when you got the phone call from Ms. Rogers?
Yes, so I got the phone call and I headed straight over to Lee Manor.
What time did you arrive at Lee Manor?
I arrived to Lee Manor at 9:45 a.m.
Where was Ms. Rogers when you arrived?
When I arrived, Ms. Rogers was upstairs with her grandmother, which after further examination, I determined had passed away.
And how did your investigation begin?
Well, I like to think of an investigation, think of it as a puzzle. Before I start an investigation, though, I need to know what puzzle I'm putting together. So what I did was I interviewed all of the witnesses that were there to see if I could get any relevant information. So I sat down with Stevie Rogers and Drew Mars.
And what was your conversation about with Stevie Rogers?
I talked to Stevie Rogers about the events that happened.
Objection, Your Honor. The question elicited by opposing counsel elicits hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may?
Yes, counsel. I do believe we are getting into some potential hearsay here. So what is your response to the counsel's proffer that this conversation was hearsay?
Your Honor, the witness is simply testifying what his part of the conversation was about or what he asked the witness, and asking a question is not a statement, therefore is not hearsay.
Response, Mr. Dubsky?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, the question itself was, what was your conversation about? And that directly elicits information through hearsay, as the conversation was with a second party.
Ms. Wally, I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Dubsky. I think the question is deficient in that it is leading us to talking about a conversation. If you have no exceptions for hearsay statements, I would ask that we contain this to only questions that Mr. Bond asked Ms. Rogers.
Yes. Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain the objection and strike the question at this point, Mr. Dubsky. If they go into these questions or discussions further, you can renew your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Bond, what did you ask Ms. Rogers during your conversation?
Well, I asked her kind of for some background information and kind of asked her insight on what she thought happened.
And now, Ms. Rogers, I would like to talk to you about your conversation with Drew Mars. What was that conversation about?
I talked to Drew Mars just to kind of get some insight on who she was and why she was there. I found out that Drew Mars was the primary caretaker and handled all of the medicine, the daily medicine for Miss Lee. And I then asked to search Mr. Mars' room.
And what did you find when you searched Mr. Mars' room?
Well, when I searched Miss Mars' room, I discovered an email that she had written on her computer.
Would you recognize that email if I showed it to you in court today?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Your Honor, this is that the email that you see on the screen?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And is that a fair and accurate picture of that email?
Yes, ma'am.
Hasn't been altered in any way?
Not that I can tell.
Your Honor, at this time, plaintiff moves Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Mr. Dubsky, is there any objection to Exhibit 13?
Yes, Your Honor. I would object to hearsay within hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may?
Just a second. Mr. Dubsky, what are your two layers of hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor. As you look at Exhibit 13, there is the text written by Drew Mars, which is the first layer of hearsay, I would argue. In addition, the second layer of hearsay would be the surrounding text and any other identifying marks of this email, as they are other statements in the exhibit that are not by Drew Mars.
So Mr. Dubsky, are you referring to what Gmail has there as your layer, or is it something within this email itself?
Yes, Your Honor. In particular, the two emails and the title of the email saying Drew Mars and the timestamp on the email as separate pieces of hearsay.
Ms. Wally, do you have a response to, and let's start with the first layer of hearsay from Google or Gmail, excuse me.
For Gmail, Your Honor, that's not the truth of the matter asserted. We're more than happy to constructively redact that portion of the document. We simply care about the statements from Drew Mars, and the statements from Drew Mars fall under party opponent 801D2D.
With that concession, Mr. Dubsky, is there any objection?
Defense counsel, the defense is willing to constructively redact everything except for these statements of Drew Mars, so long as they are established that these are in fact by Drew Mars.
Okay, so I just want to make for certain so I can give the jury this limited instruction. Ms. Wally, you're prepared to redact everything except for the body of the email?
Yes, Your Honor.
Members of the jury, you are to take Exhibit 13 only for the information contained in the body of the email. Everything else will be constructively redacted from the exhibit. Counsel, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond, what does this email say?
So this email basically indicates that Mr. Mars understood that he was the sole beneficiary of Miss Lee's will.
Now, after this, after you found this email, what happened next in your investigation?
Well, it took a few days to kind of compile the information as any good private investigator would. And I attended the will hearing a couple of days later. It was at the will hearing where Mr. Mars indicated that he had no idea that he was the sole beneficiary of the will, which was kind of a red flag to me.
Why was that a red flag to you?
Well, as we can see in this exhibit, he knew that he was the sole beneficiary. So I have no idea on the day of the will hearing why he changed his story.
Now, once you attended the will hearing, what was the next step in your investigation?
Well, after I attended the will hearing and Drew Mars made the statement that he was not the sole beneficiary, Detective Khan thought it was necessary to send the body for an autopsy, and that's what happened.
Would you recognize that autopsy that you issued in court today?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Your Honor, permission to publish Exhibit 2 to the members of the jury, which has already been pre-admitted.
You may, Ms. Wally.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond, what does this autopsy say?
The autopsy says that Miss Lee's cause of death was a fatal allergic reaction to 2 pills of chlorandramine.
What is chlorandramine?
Chlorandramine is a pretty standard over-the-counter heartburn medication, but I found out through my conversation with Drew Mars that Agatha Lee was deadly allergic to it.
Now, Mr. Bond, would you recognize the toxicology report if I showed it to you in court today?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Your Honor, permission to publish the toxicology report to the members of the jury, which has already been pre-admitted into evidence?
Ms. Wally, what exhibit number is that? I don't have it.
That would be exhibit, give me one second, Your Honor, sorry.
Objection, Your Honor. I don't have an objection to the exhibit itself. However, I do have an objection to lack of foundation, particularly with this witness speaking about this document.
Ms. Wally, response?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, the witness has already viewed this exhibit as part of his investigation and also has viewed the detective's report who conducted this exhibit and conducted this toxicology during the course of the investigation. But I can lay that foundation if you would like me to.
Certainly, counsel. I'm concerned because the analyst here is Ryan Reeves. Subject to you laying foundation that Mr. Bond is familiar with toxicology, I'm going to agree this is outside his purview.
Yes, Your Honor.
So I'm going to ask for some significant foundation before he's getting into any contents here. As this is pre-admitted, the exhibit can be admitted. It can be read, but if Mr. Bond is going to be giving any opinions whatsoever relating to anything in this document, the court is going to need significant foundation. Mr. Dibski, if you feel that foundation has not been reached, please renew your objection. But I am going to permit, as this was pre-admitted, I'm going to allow the witness to read from it.
Yes.
No comments.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Bond, what does this toxicology report say?
This toxicology report indicates that the 24 identical pills found in Miss Mars's closet were actually chlorandramine, the same drug that was that Miss Lee died from.
Now, where was the bottle of chlorandramine found?
That bottle of chlorandramine was found in Mr. Mars's closet.
And where in the closet was it found?
It was found in the closet in a black bag.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, to lack of foundation, I don't believe that this witness has explained how they are aware of a bottle of chlorandramine or where its location was.
Sustained. Ms. Wally, I'm going to ask that you lay foundation as to how Mr. Bond was aware where these items were in Mr. Mars' bedroom.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Bond, can you explain to members of the jury how you're aware where the bottle of chlorandramine was?
No, sure thing. So I worked closely with Detective Khan on this investigation. And through that investigation, we found a black bag full of the pill chlorandramine in Mr. Mars's closet.
Now, where did you find out who bought that bottle of chlorandramine?
While we weren't able to obtain any credit card statements or receipts, I did find out through my interview with Drew Mars that she had been to a pharmacy that sells chlorandramine the day before Agatha Lee had died.
And would you recognize that black bag that you were mentioning if I showed it to you in court today?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Your Honor, permission to pull up exhibit, the black bag, exhibit 10, I believe, and lay foundation.
Counsel, you may.
Now, Mr. Bond, is that the black bag that you see on the screen?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Fair and accurate picture.
It appears to be.
Hasn't been altered in any way.
No, ma'am.
Now, permission to enter exhibit 15 into evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Dubsky?
No objections at this time, Your Honor.
Exhibit 15 will be admitted without objection.
And what was containing this black bag?
That is where we found the bottle of chlorandramine, and this black bag was found in Mr. Mars's closet.
Now, during the course of the investigation, what did the evidence show?
Well, after a thorough investigation and compiling all the evidence, it all pointed towards Drew Mars.
Thank you. No further
Objection, Your Honor. To improper expert testimony. I believe that that the witness is trying to make an expert conclusion, and I don't believe the necessary foundation has been laid to prove them as an expert to make such an assumption.
Your Honor, if I may?
You may.
Your Honor, Mr. Bond is simply stating his opinion in what the evidence found during the course of his investigation. He is not making an expert opinion, and his opinion is relevant to the case as he was an investigator who was part of the investigation in the case that we're currently trying today. And it's important for the members of the jury to hear that opinion.
Mr. Dubsky, I'm going to make a finding that this testimony goes to the weight, not the admissibility. I'm sure you're about to cross-examine Mr. Bond thoroughly on the consistencies or lack thereof, if you allege, in his investigation. So I'm going to
Yes, Your Honor.
objection.
Thank you. No further questions?
Cross-examination, Mr. Dubsky?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, good morning, Mr. Bond. I'm Andrew Dubsky, and on the behalf of the defendant, Drew Mars, I'm going to be asking you a few questions.
Now, let's get to it.
Mr. Bond, excuse me. You were first retained by Miss Rogers on June 5th of 2018, correct?
Yes, I was retained on June 5th, 2018 to help locate Miss Lee.
Exactly, and they retained your services to find specifically Miss Lee, their grandmother, correct?
Yes, Miss Lee was her grandmother.
And now at first you were inclined to decline the case, correct?
Yeah, a person of my stature has to be really cognitive of what cases I take. So yeah, I was wondering if it was worth my time.
Exactly, and in your words, you believed it to be a pedestrian case.
For a skilled private investigator like me, yeah.
Exactly. However, once you discovered that Miss Rogers' grandmother was Agatha Lee, the famous author, you changed your mind, correct?
Oh, yes. Finding a high-profile author has always been on my bucket list. So of course I did it.
Like you just said, it was a high-profile case that offered notoriety, correct?
Yes, but I'm as famous as they come. If you don't know my name, you don't know private investigation.
Well, I'm sorry I don't have the pleasure, Mr. Bond, but you were able to provide Lee's address to Miss Rogers on June 7th, correct?
Yes, sir, I was.
And that means you found Agatha Lee's address in less than 2 days, correct?
I'm that good.
So you're so good that for less than 48 hours of work, you were paid $10,000 for your work?
Yeah, that's the standard rate.
Okay, Mr. Bond. And are you aware that Miss Rogers had only $200 in their account after that you were paid for your services?
I'm not sure of my clients.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
I don't think we've got into speculation. He was asked if he was aware or not. He can answer that question yes or no, which I think he did. So I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So just to clarify, Mr. Bond, were you aware that Miss Rogers had only $200 to their name after you were paid the first time?
No, I wasn't aware of their financial situation.
Okay. And isn't it true, though, that Miss Rogers has promised to pay you $25,000 for your services in this case only 2 months later after you were paid for the first time?
Yes, my rate for this case was $25,000. We agreed upon that when I conducted the investigation.
All right. And to clarify, that was only 2 months after you were paid the first time, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And you were also aware that by winning this case, Miss Rogers would inherit almost $20 million just in cash?
Yes, I was aware that Miss Lee's net worth was around $20 million. Yes, I was aware of that.
All right. So in regards to that second time, you were retained on August 15th of 2018, correct?
Yes, I was.
And this was to hire, you were hired to investigate the murder of Agatha Lee, the grandmother, correct?
Yes, I was hired to investigate the death.
And again, to clarify, this was the same grandmother you helped locate 2 months before?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered. If I may be heard.
Overruled.
So Mr. Bond, was this the same grandmother that you helped locate 2 months previous?
Yes, it was Agatha Lee.
And you arrived to Lee Manor in less than an hour after contacted by Miss Rogers, correct?
I was contacted at 8:45 and I arrived at 9:45.
Correct. And when you spoke, the first time you spoke to Miss Lee at Lee Manor, they told you they believed that Drew Mars killed Agatha, correct?
Yeah, that's very common in cases where loved ones are involved. People generally make assumptions and jump the gun. That's why I'm there, to conduct a fair investigation.
So that's a yes to my question, correct?
Yeah, yes.
And isn't it true? So by what you've given me, it's true that the same person that hired you was already pointing their finger at the defendant, Drew Mars?
Yes, Miss Rogers did think Drew Mars had something to do with it. Again, that did not affect the integrity of my investigation.
But she was still the one paying you, correct?
Yes, that's how private investigation works.
So later that morning on August 15th, you also spoke to the defendant, Drew Mars, correct?
Yes, like I mentioned on my direct, that was part of my initial process, gathering as much information as I could. So I did sit down with Mr. Mars.
And you were aware that they were Agatha Lee's live-in caretaker?
Yes, and handled all of her medicine.
And they also possessed a bedroom on the second floor of Lee Manor, right?
Yes, I did come to find that out.
And during that conversation of yours, you asked to look around their room?
Yes, I did.
However, your request was denied, wasn't it?
Yes, Mr. Mars said that I could not look in his room.
And so to clarify, Drew Mars explicitly refused your request, yes or no?
Yes, Mr. Mars said that I could not search his room.
Now, Mr. Bond, you still entered and searched through Drew Mars's room that morning, didn't you?
Yes, I did. That's why they call me a private investigator.
All right. And now, Mr. Mars, you talked about on your direct examination an exhibit that of a picture you took while you were in Mr. Mars's room, correct?
Oh, yes, the email.
And you'd recognize it if I would put it up on the screen today?
I sure would.
All right. Your Honor, permission to put up a picture of Exhibit 13 that has been constructively redacted?
Counsel, you may, and we'll just, the document you're publishing, we'll just assume that that is the clerk's copy, constructive, of course, with all redactions.
Yes, Your Honor. All right. Mr. Bond, can you see that all right?
Yes, I can see it now.
And despite the redactions, you can still see that that is a picture of a computer screen?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Bond, there are no identifying marks that can identify this computer screen as Drew Mars's computer screen?
What do you mean identifying marks?
Is there any way for you to tell that this is specifically Drew Mars's computer screen?
Oh, yes.
Could you point that out for me?
The computer was in her room. It was in her
But
car.
does this picture show to this computer to be in a room or Drew
no,
Mars's room?
no. The picture doesn't show that this.
Objection, Your Honor, to a previous ruling. If I may direct your attention to evidentiary rulings 12.
Just a second, counsel. Okay. So on evidentiary rulings, I'm starting with 13. So
Yeah, sorry. Wait. On my computer, it starts at 12, but it's the one with the court has considered and overruled all constitutional objections, including but not limited to those regarding Exhibit 13 and bond search of Mars' bedroom on August 15, 2018. Therefore, opposing counsel is trying to say that this is not Bond's email or Bond's room. However, it has been ruled that Exhibit 13 came off of Bond's search of Mars' room, and this email was found on Mars' computer.
Mr. Dubsky, is that your interpretation of, and just so we're clear, what I'm referring to is, looks like at the top of page 2, the first evidentiary ruling, which on my copy is 13.
I apologize.
Okay, and it's referring to Exhibit 13 in the search.
Yes.
From my understanding, Your Honor, I believe that evidentiary ruling says that we have waived all constitutional objections. I'm simply throwing doubt into the authenticity of this picture, which I do not believe is a constitutional objection.
Mr. Dubsky, I'm inclined to agree. Ms. Wally, I don't think we're getting into any constitutional issues at this point, or anything's been asserted. So I am going to permit this line of questioning to impeach Mr. Bond's investigation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bond, back to my question. Are there any identifying marks that can differentiate this computer screen from any other computer screen?
Well, yeah, no, not the computer screen itself, but if you look at the email, it's signed Drew at the bottom. And
Mr. Bond, are you aware that you can sign into an email account on multiple computers or a separate computer than the one in your house?
Could you repeat your question?
Mr. Bond, are you aware that you can sign into an email on different computers?
Yes, I'm aware of that, but I found no evidence to lead that that's what Drew Mars did.
I'm not talking about Drew, I'm talking about yourself, but we can move on. Now, Mr. Bond, you previously testified, no, excuse me. So, Mr. Bond, no one ever gave you permission to conduct a search and obtain this evidence, correct?
No, I don't need permission.
All right, you don't need permission, but isn't it also true that you conducted this search even before you asked for permission from Drew Mars?
Again, counselor, I don't need permission. I'm not a police officer. I don't need a warrant.
I understand the legality. I'm just simply asking you if you conducted this investigation before you specifically asked permission from the inhabitants of that room. Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Ms. Wally, is there any redirect for Mr. Bond?
Yes, Your Honor, a brief one. Mr. Bond, can you tell us about your search of Mr. Drew Mars's room?
Yes, so I went and searched Drew Mars's room, and it was in that room where I found the computer. And in that computer, I took a picture of an email that Drew Mars sent.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff rests his case in chief, but as we're running really close to all loss is 2 p.m. and it's already 1:10, I would just request to continue into the defense case in chief and not take a break.
Yeah, we are butting against all loss. I'm fine with proceeding directly into defense case in chief.
Yes, Your Honor, as long as defense counsel is okay with that.
I'm also okay, but I'd like to ask my co-counsel if they're acceptable with that.
I'm all right with that.
Defense counsel, call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Mr. Drew Mars to the stand. I would simply ask that my opposing counsel mute and turn off the video until objections are made.
Your Honor, I am more than happy to mute, but I'm supposed to be saying this according to what rules we were told. We're supposed to say on the screen if I'm objecting, if that's okay.
That's fine. You just need, as long as you're muted, that's fine with me.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Now, good afternoon, Mr. Mars. Would you please state your name for the record?
My full name is Andrew Lloyd Mars, but most people just call me Drew.
All right, Drew. What do you do for a living?
Well, right now I'm picking up some babysitting shifts whenever I can just to make ends meet and send some money back home to my family. But I've really only had one job.
And what job was that?
I was the caretaker for Agatha Lee.
Were you Miss Lee's only caretaker?
Actually, for about a year and a half, I worked as the assistant caretaker while I was still in college. But sometime in the summer of 2009, Agatha decided to hire me full time. And from there, I worked as her only caretaker, and we became close friends.
Would you please describe your relationship with Miss Agatha Lee?
Of course. Agatha was always technically my boss, but she was really more like the nana that I got to choose. We weren't family in name, but we were so much more. As her caretaker, I lived with her for about a decade. We watched movies together, read together, but we really became friends over the backgammon board.
Now, what were your responsibilities as her caretaker?
I helped Agatha with anything that she needed. She often did stuff by herself, but when she didn't, I helped her do her shopping, her cooking, her cleaning. I drove her around and I filled her pillbox every Sunday.
What pills did Miss Lee have to take?
Every night she had to take an aspirin for her heart problems, a vitamin B pill, and 2 Winterin pills for her arthritis.
Do you know if she had any allergies?
Yes, she had an allergy to chloroandramine.
Are you aware that Miss Lee had a reaction to chloroandramine?
Yes, unfortunately, that is the case.
Mr. Mars, have you ever purchased chloroandramine?
No, I've never purchased chloroandramine. There was never any reason to.
To the best of your knowledge, was there anyone else in the house that could have purchased chloroandramine?
I don't know if anyone actually did, but Stevie Rogers could have purchased it.
Now, how do you know Miss Rogers?
Ms. Rogers was Agatha's only living grandchild who came to live with us in July of 2018. And despite living with Agatha for over a decade, I never actually met Miss Rogers until then. But Agatha spoke of them often.
Were they living in the house on August 14th?
Yes, they were for about a month at that time.
To your perception, how was Miss Lee's relationship with her grandchild?
Honestly, it was okay at best. After Agatha's daughter, Veronica, died, Miss Rogers just disappeared from Agatha's life, only contacting her for more spending money or asking to pay Miss Rogers' tuition for law school until they dropped out. And that never really sat well with me.
Objection, Your Honor, if I may be heard. To speculation, if I may be heard.
You may.
Your Honor, the opposing counsel has not laid the test or laid foundation as to why Drew Mars knows when Miss Rogers would contact Miss Lee, or why she was contacting Miss Lee for money, as according to what the witness just said, contacting for only money. And the opposing counsel has not laid that foundation, but that therefore is speculation.
Response, Ms. Musto?
Your Honor, as the caretaker to Miss Lee, I feel like we have laid sufficient, and the relationship that Miss Lee had with Mr. Drew, I feel that enough foundation has been laid as both the caretaker and their personal relationship to justify the explanation that Mr. Drew Mars had knowledge of the contact between Ms. Lee and her grandchild, Miss Stevie Rogers.
Ms. Wally, think we've had enough foundation to allow this. Obviously, I think this goes more to weight than admissibility. You can certainly cross-examine Mr. Mars on statements he's making in regards to motives of Ms. Rogers.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, did Miss Lee ever try to reach out to Miss Rogers?
Yeah, she did often. She left messages and even showed me some letters that she wrote to Miss Rogers. But to my knowledge, Miss Rogers never responded.
Would you recognize one of these letters if I showed it to you?
Yes, I would. She showed me many letters.
With your permission, Your Honor, do you screen share what has been previously marked by Exhibit 10?
You may.
Pardon. Now, are you able to see this letter clearly, Mr. Drew?
Yes, I am. If you could zoom out a little, actually.
Of course. Is that any better?
Yes, it is.
Now, what is this letter about?
This letter was sent from Agatha to Stevie.
Objection, Your Honor. We can't state what the letter is about until it's been entered into evidence. No foundation has been laid to enter this exhibit into evidence.
Ms.
Your
Mister,
Honor, if I may respond. I'm not asking for Mr. Drew to solicit any statements from this letter. I'm simply laying foundation so they are able to enter this document into evidence and that they have clear knowledge about what this document is.
Ms. Wally, that's my understanding as well. I do believe Ms. Musto is attempting to lay the foundation to admit this exhibit as it wasn't one of our stipulated documents. So
Yes, Your Honor.
if the witness does go into the contents, you can renew your objection, but I think right now we're still on authentication.
Now, Mr. Drew, if you would continue, what is this letter about?
It's a letter from Agatha to her granddaughter telling the reasoning of why that Agatha took Stevie out of her will.
And is this a fair and accurate copy of that letter?
As I remember it, yes.
At this point, I would like to enter Exhibit 5 into evidence as a full exhibit.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Response, Ms. Musto?
Yes, Your Honor. On the grounds of hearsay, I would like to direct your attention to Rules of Evidence, Rule 803.3, the then existing mental state of the declarant, and Rule 803.15, as this letter and the statements that we will be eliciting deal with the interest in property, which in this example is the will.
Ms. Wally, do you have a response as to counsel's proffer that this exhibit meets two hearsay exceptions, both 803.3 and 803.15?
Your Honor, if I may, this exhibit has information, like for the first line itself, it says, your mother's death was the greatest tragedy in my life. That doesn't go to any then existing plan or intent. And a lot of this letter is talking about a relationship that doesn't go to any then existing plan or intent, as well as the objection to the response to 803.15. That is not about property. As talking about the mother's death is not anything related to property. Therefore, the contents of this letter do not fall under 803.3 or 803.15.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
We are not focusing in the terms of this direct on the first, second, or even third paragraph of this letter. We're simply referring to the fourth paragraph that Agatha has decided to change her will and the last sentence of that fourth paragraph. So as soon as I sign this letter, I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew. The defense is the defense is willing to constructively redact the first, second, and third paragraph, if that is all right with our opposing counsel.
Ms. Wally, does that seem to cure some of your problems with the letter in its entirety?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, subject to that concession. And counsel, I can't see the top. This is Exhibit 10.
Yes, Your Honor, this is Exhibit 10.
Okay, So Exhibit 10 will be conditionally admitted or constructively redacted. So we will only be admitting paragraphs 4 and 5. And I'm going to also include the bottom that says love, Nathan, Agatha included in that. You may
Yes,
proceed.
sir. Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Drew, please read the first sentence of the fourth paragraph and the last sentence of that paragraph.
Of course. It says, because we become family in name only, I've decided to change my will. And then the last sentence reads, so just as soon as I sign this letter, I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew.
Thank you. Permission to deconstruct the demonstrative of Exhibit 10?
You may.
Now, did you discuss the topic, or I'm sorry, did the topic of Miss Lee's will ever come up again after Miss Rogers' arrival at Lee Manor?
Yes, there was a conversation between Agatha and Miss Rogers about it on August 14th.
Where were you at the time?
I just made 2 cups of tea for Agatha and Miss Rogers.
Now, how do you know that this conversation was taking place?
Well, I was bringing the tea up to the study when I heard them.
And what did you hear happening?
Agatha told Miss Rogers that she wasn't going to change her will.
Did you hear how Miss Rogers responded?
Kinda. I heard Miss Rogers try to speak up a little, but nothing really came out. I don't remember exactly what they said, but then I heard Agatha coming back towards the door.
Were you able to see how Miss Rogers looked?
Yeah, they appeared disappointed and angry when they saw me. They were scowling and glared at me.
Did you see Miss Lee again that day?
I did. I drove her to a few appointments around town, then back home.
Did you return home at any point without Miss Lee?
No, after I dropped her off, I went to the pharmacy to pick up some toiletries for myself. It's the only time that I really get to be able to pick up my own personal items. And then after that, I went back to pick Agatha up from her meeting.
How long were you and Miss Lee gone for?
It must have been around 2.5 hours.
To your knowledge, was there anyone at Lee Manor when you and Agatha left?
To my knowledge, it was just Stevie. They were still in the study when we left.
Now, did you see Miss Rogers when you returned home later that day?
Yes, I did actually. They were sitting in the sitting area next to all the upstairs bedrooms, drinking what seemed to be wine, but the bottle was empty at that time. I also saw Miss Rogers again later in Agatha's study when I was serving dinner, but I didn't see either them or Agatha after that.
When was the next time you saw Miss Lee?
It was the next morning at 8:30-ish. I made coffee the same way I always did. A light Colombian roast with a small pitcher of cream and 4 sugar cubes on the side. And I went up to her. When I saw her,
Drew, I know this is going to be hard to recount, but when you're ready, would you please tell us what happened?
of course, when I saw her, she was motionless. I got closer and put the coffee tray down, trying to wake her up, but she wasn't moving or even breathing. So I went to go check her pulse, but she didn't have one. That's when I realized that she was gone. I backed up in disbelief and fell to the ground. I couldn't breathe.
So what did you do next?
I half crawled and half stumbled into Mrs. Rogers' room and told them what had happened, but I was crying. I was devastated.
Mr. Drew, did anybody have access to your bedroom?
Anyone could access my bedroom. There's no lock on it.
Would it be possible for Miss Rogers to have gone into any of these rooms while you were out with Miss Lee on August the 14th?
Absolutely.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Wally, do you have a cross-examination for Mr. Mars?
Yes, Your Honor. One second. Good afternoon, Mr. Mars.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start by talking about your relationship as Ms. Lee's caretaker. You were her caretaker, correct?
Yes, I was for a long time.
And you were hired by Ms. Lee when she had just had a heart attack.
Yes, that is correct. She had just suffered from a heart attack.
That was in 2008.
Yes, correct.
And when she had just had a heart attack that was induced by ingesting chlorandramine.
Yes, and that's when I learned that she had an allergy to chlorandramine.
And when you learned that she had an allergy to chlorandramine, you started handling all her day-to-day activities, right?
Yes, that is correct. I handled them when she didn't do them herself, but she was a pretty independent woman, so she often did do them by herself.
But you did handle all of her medication, didn't you?
I filled them up every Sunday, yes, one time a week.
So, Mr. Mars, you are also aware that Miss Lee was a wealthy woman, wasn't she?
Yes, she had written this wonderful mystery novel. Unfortunately, I never read it, but it's called Death in a Bottle.
But you grew up not so wealthy, right?
Yes, that is true.
Objection to prejudicial versus probative.
Your Honor, if I may be heard.
You may.
Your Honor, this entire case is about the motive and proving that Drew Mars had a motive of killing Agatha Lee, which was receiving her will, and therefore, speaking of Mr. Drew Mars's financial status and how he didn't have as much money, goes to motive, and therefore is substantially more probative than it is prejudicial to the jury.
Overall,
Your Honor, if I may respond? Never mind.
Permission to proceed?
you may.
Mr. Mars, you grew up not so wealthy, correct?
Yes, that is correct. But I was very thankful when Agatha gave me the job.
And you grew up in a small home.
Yes, I was in a small home in Mobile.
And when you grew up, when you got this job, you used to send all your money, most of your salary back home, didn't you?
Well, I didn't have to, but I wanted to help them out, yes.
Your family needed the money.
Yes, they did.
And your sibling also got sick, right?
Yes, my sibling was sick at the time.
And your sibling's treatment needed more money, correct?
Yes, like all doctor treatments, it costs a substantial amount of money.
And in this job, you had the unique opportunity to make more money, right?
I did make more money, yes. She paid me very well and gave me room and board, so I think it was a very generous job.
But then she also changed her will in 2018, didn't she?
She did, and I was grateful for the relationship that we had.
And when she changed her will, she made you the sole beneficiary of her entire estate.
Yes, she did.
That would be about $20 million.
About, I don't know the exact number, but yes.
And then Miss Lee rekindled her relationship with her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers, right?
She was in the process of it, yes.
And when Stevie moved back in June of 2018, Miss Lee started spending time with her, right?
Yeah, she did start spending time with her. They were living in the same house after all.
They started playing dinner together. They started eating dinner together, right?
Yes, they did.
Just like you and Miss Lee used to.
Yeah, and that was either her and Stevie or her and me or all three of us together. But sometimes it's just the two of them.
So sometimes it was just two of them, and just the two of them were playing backgammon sometimes, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Just like you and Miss Lee used to, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And slowly, Miss Lee stopped watching TV with you.
No, she didn't stop watching TV with me. She just
Well, she was
started.
Bringing back to my question, she was spending more time with Miss Lee, with Stevie Rogers, than she was with you, correct?
Yes, but she wasn't stopping spending time with me.
But she was spending more time with Stevie Rogers, correct?
She started spending time with Stevie, yes.
So on August 14th, you heard a conversation between Stevie Rogers and Miss Agatha Lee, right?
I did, yes.
And you talked about it a little bit in direct examination, right?
Yes, I did.
You stated that, but you were in court today when Stevie Rogers testified, weren't you?
I was here, yes.
And you heard Stevie Rogers say that Agatha Lee was going to replace you in the will, right? That's what she said.
did. I did hear that, but that wasn't correct.
But that's what you heard, correct?
That's what I heard in court today, yes.
And later that same day, you were driving Miss Lee, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And you heard another conversation.
Yes, I did.
And this time it was with Miss Lee and a guy named Kirby, right?
It was on the phone, yeah.
And Kirby Doolittle is Miss Lee's personal attorney.
Yes, that's correct.
And Kirby Doolittle is the only Kirby you've met.
The only Kirby I've met, yes, but Agatha knows many more people than I do.
So you assumed that she was calling Kirby Doolittle, right?
Well, yeah, I assume because that's the only Kirby I know, but I don't know who else
So,
Agatha knows.
but she asked, when Miss Lee called Kirby Doolittle, she asked for an appointment for that same week, didn't she?
When Agatha was on the phone, she did try to schedule an appointment, yes.
For that same week, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And immediately after dropping Miss Lee off at lunch, you drove to the pharmacy, didn't you?
Yeah, I had to pick up a couple of personal items. I had a tender date, so it's one of the only times I get to myself.
But you did drive to the pharmacy, right?
Yes, I did.
That same day on August 14th, right?
Yes, I did.
And you claim you don't remember what you bought at the pharmacy, right?
No, I just remember it was some personal toiletries for myself.
But, Mr. Mars, you do remember the conversation Miss Lee had with Kirby, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And you remember the conversation Miss Lee had with Stevie Rogers earlier in the day, don't you?
I remember that very well, yes.
But you don't remember what you bought at the pharmacy, right?
No, like I said, it was just a couple toiletries. I don't remember what I bought 2 years ago.
So let's talk about what you can buy at a pharmacy. You know what chlorandamine is, right?
Yes, I do.
Over-the-counter heartburn medication.
Yes, I know that.
And you can buy it at any pharmacy, can't you?
Yes, you can buy it at one of the many pharmacies across town.
So you're also aware that, so what does chlorandamine look like, Mr. Mars?
It's a small pill, like an average pill-shaped purple pill, yes.
Small purple pill, correct?
Yes.
You're also aware that Miss Lee took Wintrin every day, don't you?
Yes, I am aware of that. It was for arthritis.
And what does Wintrin look like?
It looks very similar. It's a small purple pill.
Also a small purple pill, right?
Yes.
So you would agree with me that Wintrin and chlorandamine look identical.
Yes, they look very similar.
They look identical, in fact, right?
Yes.
And a layperson like myself wouldn't be able to tell them apart, would I?
Objection
No.
to speculation, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may?
You may.
Your Honor, Drew Mars, it's already been discussed that Drew Mars is a nurse and handles medication. Therefore, he's able to tell if a person like myself would be able to tell the difference. Because as he knows, he's a nurse and can tell the difference. But a layperson like myself wouldn't be able to.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think we're getting just a bit outside of his purview unless you want to lay some further foundation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Mars, that day, again, you were in courtroom when Stevie Rogers testified.
Yes, I was.
And you heard Stevie Rogers say that you went into Miss Lee's room that same night, right?
Yeah, but she had been drinking at the time. I don't know if she took me for someone else. I don't know what happened.
Bringing it back to my question, that is what you heard Stevie Rogers say, right?
That's what I heard her say.
And she said that you went into the room between 9:35 and 9:40 p.m.
That's what she said, but I did not. I was in bed at that time.
But that is what she said, right?
Yes, that is what she said.
And Mr. Mars, you know that Miss Lee went to bed about 10 p.m. that night, right?
I'm not sure when she went to bed, really.
It's your testimony that you don't know when Miss Agatha Lee went to bed that night?
Oh, sorry. I heard Stevie Rogers. Yes, she did go to bed almost every night around 10 o'clock.
And she takes her pills right before bed every night, right?
Yes.
So you're aware that Miss Lee would normally take 2 pills of Wintrin out of her pill organizer and take them right before bed, right?
Yes, along with her aspirin and vitamin B pill.
You're also aware that your fingerprints were found on 2 pills of Wintrin, right?
They should be in all the pills that are in the case. I fill it every Sunday.
But 2 pills of Wintrin in a pill bottle had your fingerprints, didn't they?
Yes, as it should be, as I put them in the pill organizer every week.
But bringing back to my question, She took 2 pills every night, right? Miss Lee
Yes.
Nolan took 2 pills every night. And those 2 pills found that had your fingerprints in the whole winter bottle, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, you're also aware that the very next morning, Miss Lee was found dead, right?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
And she died from an allergic reaction to 2 chlorandramine pills, which look identical to Winterin, right?
Objection, Your Honor, rather renewing my objection to speculation
Your Honor, if I
and outside of this witness's review.
I'm gonna overrule this time. I think we have established, and I don't think we're getting into that territory just yet.
Yes, Your Honor. So she was found dead from 2 pills of chlorandramine that look identical to Winterin, right?
Yes, that's the case.
And you're also aware that there was another place that your fingerprints were found, right?
My fingerprints are all over, yes.
But your fingerprints were also found on a black bag.
Yes, they were.
That black bag had chlorandramine inside, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
And that was found in your closet.
Yes, I hadn't seen it until then, until the police showed it to me.
The black bag with your fingerprints on it with chlorandramine inside was found in your closet.
With chlorandramine and cigarettes, but I haven't smoked in over 7 years. The black bag was not mine.
So bringing you back to my question, a black bag with chlorandramine and your fingerprints on it was found in your closet.
Yes, but it was not my bag.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, counsel. Is there any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. With that, Mr. Mars, you are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Does the defense have any other witnesses they wish to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense would like to call Ryan Cabrera to the stand.
Okay. You may proceed, counsel.
Thank you. Good morning. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Ryan Cabrera. I'm a professional biographer by trade. Maybe you've read some of my recent work.
I don't think I have, Ms. Cabrera, but how did you become involved in this lawsuit?
I was just doing my job. Until she passed, I was writing about the Agatha Lee. Can you believe that? I had the exclusive scoop. It even made it into a chapter of my personal autobiography, The Career of Cabrera.
Now, could you briefly explain who Agatha Lee is for the jury?
Of course. Agatha Lee is one of the best-selling American authors in American history. She wrote the acclaimed mystery novel Death in a Bottle in 1968. It was a massive success, but then after that, she basically dropped off the map, never published another book again. No biography has ever covered the later half of her life, until mine.
And how did you get into contact with Agatha Lee for this biography?
Well, she's a very private person, and when she moved from Alabama 2011, I didn't have an address. Nobody had an address. So I sent a letter in 2015 to her publisher, asking them to just pass the message along to Miss Lee and telling Miss Lee I wanted to write about her. Years went by without a response. I lost a little hope, pursued some other individuals to write about.
But did you hear back?
Oh, yes. On February 1st of 2018, 3 years later, I was persistent. I got an email saying go to Midlands. I dropped my whole life. I met Agatha at her new house on February 8th.
And so you came to Midlands to study her, and how would you two meet?
Well, we would meet a couple times a week, every week. The venue was Agatha's house, or a walk at the campgrounds, or a meal at a restaurant. And we would just have conversation. That's the best way to get information about someone you're just meeting. So we'd talk about each other's lives. I would ask her questions. There's one question I wasn't allowed to ask, though. She told me I couldn't ask why she never wrote another book.
So what did you learn about Agatha Lee in her life?
Well, Miss Lee was a very independent woman. She liked to stay home, and she really only went out, to the library, the restaurant to meet me. The only person she had regular contact with was Drew Mars, her live-in caretaker.
And while you were getting to know Agatha, how'd you perceive her relationship with her caretaker, Drew Mars?
Honestly, if you didn't know Drew, I would think that he was her grandson. I mean, they had such a close, trusting relationship. I'm not surprised. Drew worked for Agatha for over a decade. It's the type of length and relationship that builds trust. Agatha even told me once, Drew is more than a caretaker. Drew is family.
And do you know if anyone else was living at Lee Manor at that time?
Not until July 4th. It was just Agatha and Drew. And then in July, Stevie Rogers moved in.
And to your knowledge, who is Stevie Rogers?
That's Agatha's granddaughter, her only surviving relative at the time. I don't know them personally though.
Did you ever learn more about Mrs. Rogers?
Yeah, Agatha opened up about Stevie Rogers on June 15th, just a few weeks before Miss Rogers actually arrived at Lee Manor. From what Agatha told me, she was saying that Stevie was a bit spoiled as a kid, but Agatha loved her. And Miss Rogers was her only grandchild. They were close growing up while Miss Rogers was growing up. But that all changed when Agatha's daughter, Stevie's mother, died in a car crash.
So how did Agatha Lee and Miss Rogers' relationship change after Miss Rogers stopped visiting?
Well, Miss Rogers stopped communicating with Agatha completely, except for maybe one phone call that Agatha mentioned. Agatha seemed very torn up about it. She felt abandoned by Stevie. She even went so far as to remove Miss Rogers from her will in February 2018.
And how did you come to know about the contents of the will?
Oh, it came up in our conversations. At one point, Agatha showed me an older will from 2008, and then one from 2018, and a letter that she sent to Stevie after the will revision in 2018.
So let's focus on the two wills you just mentioned. Would you recognize them if I were to show them to you today in court?
Definitely. I've seen them before.
Your Honor, permission to share my a screen to show exhibits 8 and 9.
You may.
And point of clarification, Your Honor, I believe exhibit 9 is constructively entered.
That was my ruling.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Cabrera, what are the two documents you see in front of you?
Those are Agatha's wills, the previous one from 2008 and then the 2018 revision.
And do they appear as you saw them that day?
Yes, they seem to be in the same condition.
All right, Your Honor, at this time, the defense offers both 8 and 9 as full exhibits.
Is there any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, so we will revise. So now exhibit 9 will be admitted in its entirety, as well as exhibit 8, which, yeah, exhibit 8 and 9 will be admitted in entirety.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Cabrera, could you please highlight any substantive differences you noticed between these two wills?
Yes, so the first was signed in Monroeville, Alabama in 2008. And the biggest difference is that Agatha leaves all of her possessions to Stevie Rogers. And then the second will is signed in 2018 in Ryder County, Midlands, where Agatha lives now, or lived. That will leaves everything to Drew Mars, and it completely excludes Miss Rogers.
All right, thank you. And now I'd like to refer to the letter you just mentioned. Your Honor, permission to put up a copy of Exhibit 10?
You may.
All right. A moment here. Thank you. Now, Ms. Cabrera, is that the same letter or the redacted part of the letter, or the parts that are not redacted, do they resemble the letter that you were given by Miss Agatha Lee?
Yes, I remember this letter, and from the unredacted parts, yes.
Now, I'd like you to go back to when you first saw that letter. To the best of your recollection, what was described in the letter itself?
Well, from what I remember Agatha saying, the letter is addressed to Miss Rogers from Nana Agatha. So sweet. I remember that it goes on about how Agatha supported Miss Rogers financially and she wanted to stop doing that. She thought it was a mistake. So Agatha's just explained to Miss Rogers that she's disinheriting her. She explains that Miss Rogers' family and name only, and Drew Mars has been doing more for Miss Agatha, and she's going to leave everything to Drew Mars.
Okay, thank you. Permission to deconstruct the exhibit?
Right.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Cabrera, did you ever meet Miss Rogers in person?
I did. I met Miss Rogers on July 6th. Agatha and I had a meeting set for that day, so I arrived, but Agatha was caught up with Stevie, and we rescheduled for 2 days later. But at that point, I did meet Miss Rogers.
And how did Agatha react to having Miss Rogers back in their life?
Oh, she was happy to have Miss Rogers back. At our rescheduled meeting, I did learn that Agatha knew that Miss Rogers was just out of rehab, and Agatha didn't buy it at all and basically said that she thinks Miss Rogers was there just for some money.
And did Agatha appear upset by this belief?
That was the thing. She told me she didn't care. Agatha was just happy that Miss Rogers was back in her life.
And how did Drew Mars react to Mrs. Rogers' arrival?
Well, I made a comment about how, to Drew, about how Agatha seemed so happy with her granddaughter. And Drew wasn't very thrilled with my comment. He seemed concerned.
Why do you believe that Drew Mars was concerned?
Well, after I made that comment, Drew just expressed that he was worried about Miss Rogers' intentions, that he thought Miss Rogers was just there for Agatha's money. I mean, a decade of caretaking for her, I'm not surprised that Drew was protective.
So when did you and Miss Lee stop meeting?
Well, we didn't. We were still meeting up until the day that Agatha died. We had a meeting on the 14th. It was a Tuesday.
And how did you find out about Agatha's death?
Drew called me. The poor guy was crying so badly on the phone I barely understood him, but I got the message. Agatha died in her sleep.
And are you still writing Agatha's biography?
Of course. It was such a tragedy to lose her, but her story is not finished, and I will do it justice. The last part of the biography is going to include the mystery behind her death. It's going to make her own biography a bit of a mystery as well.
Now, have you been following the investigation into her death?
Of course, that's how I'm getting my information now. From what I've gathered, her death played out exactly the same way that Carrie Bellion died in Death in a Bottle. That's the mystery novel Miss Lee wrote. We just don't know who the killer is yet. Those are the last pages to be written.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to constructively enter Exhibit 7 into evidence, and I have no more further questions.
7 will be admitted. It was one of the pre-admitted documents.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Mr. Beck, you may proceed with cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Cabrera, you mentioned a lot about how much Agatha adores her granddaughter, Agatha, or Miss Rogers, right?
Yes. I mean, I saw Agatha happy around Miss Rogers.
You know that they were spending a lot of time together when she came back around July.
Oh, yes, they were.
You know that this was the happiest that you ever seen Agatha Lee, right?
I mean, I'd only known her for a couple months, but it was at the time.
And you also are familiar with the defendant and that she lives alone. or that he lives alone with Agatha Lee, right?
Yes, Drew and Agatha live together.
You understand that the defendant is Agatha Lee's caretaker, right?
Yes.
And you've actually seen the defendant hand Agatha pills and give her medicine, right?
Yes, I have. It seemed to be Drew's job was to make sure Agatha took her medications.
And you've actually heard Agatha say before that she would take anything that the defendant ever handed her, right?
I did. Like I said, they had a very trusting relationship.
And you actually are quite familiar with the defendant in a personal way as well, right?
Not that personally. I knew
Well,
just I
you're
knew
here
Drew
testifying.
from my meetings with Agatha, but that was all.
Well, you're here testifying on behalf of Drew voluntarily, right?
Oh, I am. Since I did have that reason for knowing Drew asked me.
And you actually made an agreement with Drew after you agreed to testify, right?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, you would agree with me that the defendant told you after you agreed to testify that the defendant would give you a part of Agatha's will, right?
Yes, Drew was really nice to offer something from Agatha's will because, well, he didn't need all of it. It's a lot to inherit, and he was a bit overwhelmed, so he did.
So, Ms. Cabrera, it's true today that if you testify and things go the way that the defendant needs it to go, that you stand to receive some of Agatha's will, right?
Yes, that is true.
Thank you. We have nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Is there any redirect?
No redirect at this time due to time constraints, Your Honor.
All right. We are going to roll directly into closing statements, if that's okay with you, Mr. Dubsky, and you, Ms. Wally.
Yes, Your Honor.
I want you to take your time. I've been assured by our bailiff that even though we're butting against all laws, I want y'all to have time to give the opening or closing statements that you've prepared. So, let's just do that.
So just to clarify, Your Honor, you want us to give our full 9 minutes, or are we cutting it so that we have just the same amount of time and cut it?
Timekeepers, how much are left on both closings, real quick? And you can type it in chat.
Because what I've heard that we need to definitely end as close to 2 p.m. as possible. So I'm thinking we can just split it and do 4 or 5 minutes both, if that's okay with opposing counsel. Unless the bailiff is letting us do all 9 minutes, I'm not. But that's what I've heard is we just.
Looks like defense has 6 minutes. What's the time left on plaintiff?
From what I know is I have my full 9 minutes.
I don't want to do 15, so 6.
Just a point of clarification, is all loss 2 p.m.?
Yes, but the bailiff just said, she just put in the chat, I will cut as short as I need to. Oh, sorry. She just put in the chat, as long as we're close, we are okay with all loss.
Okay. I'm willing to constructively minimize how much time I have as long as the plaintiff is willing to do the same.
Yeah, we can do 5 minutes each. Does that work?
All right, so
I'm fine with that.
Perfect. Permission to proceed?
you may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Act fast or lose everything. Members of the jury, the defendant, Drew Mars, had to act fast and kill Agatha Lee, or she was going to lose everything. She had a lot to lose. $20 million, Ms. Lee's entire estate, and her sibling who was sick. But because of the defendant's actions, Ms. Lee lost her life, the world lost a renowned author, and Ms. Stevie Rogers lost the only family she had left, her grandmother, Agatha Lee. And that's why we're here today. The defendant acted fast. On August 14th of 2018, the defendant heard a conversation between Ms. Rogers and Ms. Lee, where Ms. Lee was going to replace the defendant in her will. The defendant knew she had to act fast. She heard another conversation that very same day, where Ms. Lee called her attorney, Kirby Doolittle, and asked to change the will and have an appointment for that very same week. That same day, the defendant went to the pharmacy, took out 2 pills, went to the pharmacy and bought chlorandamine, went home, took out 2 pills of Wintrin out of Miss Lee's pill organizer with his fingerprints, put them back in the pill bottle, and replaced them with 2 pills of chlorandamine that looked identical. And then proceeded to hide that bottle of chlorandamine that he had bought in his closet in a black bag. The defendant acted fast, so he would not lose everything. We as a plaintiff have the burden of proof. We had to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant purposely caused the death of Miss Agatha Lee. Preponderance of the evidence means more likely than not, 50% and a feather. Purposely means with the intent or hope that your actions will cause a result. And defendant's actions can be seen on the timeline that's being put on the screen right now. Defendant's actions were he went to the pharmacy because he heard the conversations. He heard the conversations between Miss Lee and Stevie Rogers and learned that he was going to be replaced in the will. He also learned that Miss Lee was going to change that will that very same week by making an appointment with her attorney. He went to the pharmacy, bought a bottle of chlorandamine, which he knew Miss Lee was fatally allergic to, as you know, the defendant was the caretaker. Went home that night, went into Miss Lee's room, took out the 2 pills of Wintrin, which looked identical to chlorandamine, out of the pill organizer, put them back in the bottle, and we found his fingerprints on those 2 pills, replaced them with chlorandamine, and Miss Lee unfortunately took those 2 pills and died. You saw the autopsy, members of the jury. Miss Lee took those pills and died from 2 pills of chlorandamine. Defendant's actions were purposeful. The defendant caused the death of Miss Agatha Lee. Therefore, in Midlands, according to the Slayer statute, defendant should not receive any part of the decedent's estate. I ask that you find what the evidence supports and what justice demands. That timeline right there, from August 14th, and Miss Lee was found dead on August 15th. There was 1 person who went to the pharmacy. There was 1 person whose fingerprints were found in that black bag. There was 1 person who went into Miss Lee's room, and there was 1 person who had the motive to lose everything. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wally. Mr. Dubsky?
All right. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Right.
All right. Your Honor, members of the jury, may it please the court. Members of the jury, Miss Stevie Rogers was family in name only. Now, we're here because the plaintiff has come across and told you, jury members, that Drew Mars knowingly and purposefully caused the death of Agatha Lee. That's what they're telling you. They tell you that time was running out for her ailing family member, that they only had to act fast because there was an appointment that they had to make. They had to go fast, fast, fast. But I'm asking you, members of the jury, to slow down. Think about this case. Consider what's been put before you make a rash decision. Now, the burden of the proof is on the plaintiff. More likely than not, they have to tell you that Drew Mars knowingly and purposefully killed Agatha Lee. Now, Drew Mars was Agatha Lee's caretaker, and what you've heard from the defense's statements today is that that bond as her caretaker was something more. That Stevie Rogers was family, yes, but only in name. Now, you heard from the plaintiff You heard from Stevie Rogers themselves that they were low on money, that they hadn't talked to their grandmother in over 8 years, barring one phone call. And coincidentally, as soon as they ran out of money, decided to appear at the door of their grandmother, asking for a place to stay, that they had just gotten out of rehab. Now, you also heard from Drew Mars' testimony that that's not the full story, that yes, they went to rehab, but they were still drinking. And that night, they realized that they needed to do something because Agatha Lee did not want to change the will. That the will she currently had was that Drew Mars would inherit everything. Now, why would I say that we don't know if she wanted to change her will? Well, you heard about an appointment. We don't know conclusively what that appointment was about or who she was talking to. Yes, there are assumptions, but we don't know for sure. We don't know if it was a dentist appointment. We don't know if it was an appointment with a friend. Now, the fast and quick reaction would be, of course, the only lawyer that they know, it must be to change her will. But that's fast thinking. I want you to slow down and consider the evidence. And you heard yourself from Drew Mars that 10 years of close family, of being well paid, she had no incentive to take money from Agatha Lee or inherit $10 million by killing her. They were being paid well and they were as good as family. Now, the plaintiff is also telling you, oh, her fingerprints must be on the pills. She's the one who works with all the pills. It has to be her, the only person who accesses the pills. Again, slow down. Of course, Drew Mars's pills would be on Agatha Lee's pills. The fingerprints would be there because she's the one who fills the prescriptions, who puts them in to her categorized pill planner. And someone who acts like family and has such a delicate role wouldn't throw it all away for the sake of money. They were paid plenty. Now, you also heard from Mr. Bond that they were paid $25,000 by the plaintiff to find Drew Mars guilty. And that's $25,000 of reasoning. Now, you also heard from Ryan Cabrera, who followed Agatha Lee closely and told you about their observations between what was really happening in the Lee Manor where Agatha Lee, Drew Mars, and Stevie Rogers lived. And she told you that a layman could easily have mistaken Drew Mars for a grandson. But as we heard in testimony today, that they're not related by blood. In fact, it is Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers who are related. But that relationship is family in name only. And that's why when you slow down and consider the evidence, we believe that you'll find Drew Mars not liable and not associated with the death of Agatha Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Wally, am I correct to assume that you were not planning on giving a rebuttal, that you used all 5 minutes?
I did not. I actually had 40 seconds left to do a quick rebuttal, but if that, the host disabled my video, so I'm not sure if you can actually see me.
Let's see.
Oh, there we go. I'm good. Okay, just 40 seconds. May it please the court. Your Honor, members of the jury, opposing counsel just came before you and tried to tell you that Mr. Mars touches all the pills and has his fingerprints of all pills. But members of the jury, you heard today, Ms. Lee died of 2 pills of chlorandamine and 2 pills of Winterin had her fingerprints. Drew Mars knew he was going to be replaced. His fingerprints were found in the black bag. His fingerprints were found on the 2 Winterin pills. He replaced those pills in that pill organizer and caused the death of Miss Agatha Lee. What's more likely, Mr. Mars killing the one person who was going to replace her, or Stevie Rogers killing the one person who was going to add her back in the will? Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right.